All right, listeners, buckle up. Today, we're going somewhere really different, a place I bet most of us haven't explored much before. We're going to take a deep dive into Tibetan feminism. And yeah, no, it might sound kind of unexpected, right? Like ancient traditions and modern feminist goals. How do those even fit together?
Well, it definitely challenges a lot of our Western assumptions about what feminism is and what it looks like.
Totally. And that's why I'm so excited to dig into this. Our main guide for this deep dive is an article, really fascinating, from TATANKA.site. It's called, get this, Tibet's Feminist Awakening, Bridging Ancient Traditions with Modern Leadership. Even the title kind of blows your mind a little, you know?
Yeah, it definitely grabs your attention.
So one thing that really jumped out at me right away was this idea that Tibetan women, like throughout history, they've always had these crucial roles in their society,
Yeah,
but not always the ones we might picture, from a Western perspective.
exactly. It's way more complex than many people realize. For centuries, like going way back, Tibetan women, they've been the backbone of their communities, you know? They're caregivers, they're healers, they're entrepreneurs, they're running businesses. And in some parts of Tibet, they even had, get this, matrilineal inheritance systems.
Whoa, wait, so that means
It means family lineage and property, all that stuff passed down through the mother's side, not the father's.
that's so different from what I think a lot of us in the West would assume about Tibetan culture, right?
For sure. But, it's important to remember, like any society, Tibet has its complexities. It's not some perfect utopia of gender equality or anything. There's definitely a patriarchal side to it as well, especially when you look at the monasteries.
Yeah, the religious institution.
Exactly. Within the monasteries, women haven't always had, like, equal opportunities to rise to leadership positions
Hmm.
or to reach the highest levels of religious study.
So it's a mixed bag then, a bit of both.
Yeah, it's more nuanced than just, oppressed versus liberated.
Right. And this is where things get really interesting because even within that kind of complex context, change is happening. And the article, it highlights this group, the Tibetan Women's Association, the TWA. They were founded way back in 1959, so clearly they've been at this for a while.
Oh yeah, the TWA has been a major force for change in Tibet.
What can you tell us about the kind of work they do?
So their main focus is on securing basic rights for women.
Yeah.
Yeah, fundamental stuff. They work on expanding educational opportunities for girls and women. And a big part of their mission is promoting economic independence, which makes a ton of sense, right? If you want true equality, you got to have economic power too.
Absolutely. It's about giving women agency, the ability to control their own lives.
Exactly. And what's really interesting about the TWA is their approach, it's deeply rooted in understanding Tibetan culture and Buddhist values.
So they're not just trying to impose some outside Western model of feminism.
Not at all. They're working from within the cultural context.
Can you give us an example of how that plays out, like in their programs or something?
Sure. So a major area they focus on is economic empowerment. They support these initiatives like women-led cooperatives, where women can work together, pool their resources, and build businesses. And they also have these vocational training programs, teaching traditional crafts, but also modern business skills like marketing and stuff.
So it's like blending the old and the new.
Exactly. Taking those traditional skills and giving them a modern twist.
That's so cool. It's like honoring the past while also building for the future.
Yeah, it's a really smart strategy.
Yeah, the article also mentions some like really inspiring individual women who are like pushing boundaries and changing things.
Oh, for sure. There are some incredible figures.
Like who? Give us some names.
Okay, so one that really stands out is 𝗧𝗔𝗧𝗔𝗡𝗄. She's a Buddhist nun, super dedicated to achieving the highest level of scholarship in Tibetan Buddhism.
Jizz.
It's called the Geshe degree. And traditionally, it was only open to men.
Yeah.
But 𝗧𝗔𝗧𝗡, she fought like crazy for equal access to education for nuns.
So she paved the way for other women to reach that level of scholarship.
Yeah, she was a real trailblazer.
So that's incredible. It makes me think about how much courage it must take to challenge those deeply rooted norms, especially in a religious context.
For sure, it's not easy to go against the grain like that.
And then there's this other woman, 𝗪𝗪, right?
Oh yeah, 𝗪𝗪, she's amazing. She's an entrepreneur, very successful. And she saw this huge potential in traditional Tibetan crafts, like a way to create economic opportunities for women, especially in rural areas.
That makes sense, like utilizing those existing skills and resources.
Exactly. So she started this business that not only supports these artisans, these women who are creating these amazing crafts, but she's also really committed to sustainable development practices, protecting the environment.
So it's like a win-win-win situation.
Exactly. Empowering women, preserving culture, and protecting the planet.
It seems like this idea of like collective well-being, it's really central to Tibetan feminism.
You're absolutely right. It's a key difference between how feminism is often framed in the West versus how it's understood in Tibet. Like in the West, especially in the early waves of feminism, the focus was a lot on individual rights, individual empowerment, which is super important, don't get me wrong. But Tibetan feminism, it's deeply rooted in this Buddhist concept of interdependence.
Interdependence, huh? What does that mean exactly?
It's this idea that we're all connected, like our well-being is tied to the well-being of everyone around us and even to the well-being of the planet.
So it's not just about me, myself, and I, it's about us.
Precisely. It's about creating a society where everyone can thrive.
And this is where those Buddhist teachings on compassion and nonviolence come in, right?
Exactly. For Tibetan feminists, these aren't just like nice ideas. They're guiding principles for action, for how to create change.
Okay, so I'm starting to see how these things connect, but I gotta be honest, I'm still a little surprised to hear about Buddhist teachings being used to, like, challenge gender norms, you know? Because I think a lot of people in the West might associate Buddhism with, like, passivity, acceptance of the status quo, that kind of thing.
Right, I get that. That's a common misconception. But it's crucial to understand that Buddhism, at its core, it's about challenging all forms of suffering. And that includes the suffering caused by inequality and injustice, whether it's based on gender, race, or anything else.
So Buddhism is more radical than we might think.
Oh yeah, way more radical. And one of the key ways it challenges suffering is by challenging hierarchical structures, the systems of power that create those inequalities.
Okay, I'm curious to hear more about that. Like, how do Buddhist teachings actually challenge those hierarchies?
Well, the core of Buddhist philosophy is this idea that all beings are inherently equal and interconnected, right? That goes directly against the whole notion that some people or groups are just like inherently superior to others, which is basically the foundation of most hierarchical systems, whether we're talking about gender, caste, or whatever.
So in a way, Buddhist teachings are kind of like inherently subversive.
Totally. They have this built-in potential to disrupt oppressive systems. And that's what makes Buddhism such a powerful force for social change. It gives you this framework for challenging the status quo, for building a more just and equitable world.
Wow, this is blowing my mind a little, I have to admit.
It's a lot to take in for sure.
But it's so fascinating. And it definitely makes me want to learn more about how these ideas are actually being put into practice.
Well, that's a perfect segue, because the article actually dives into a really cool story that illustrates all of this in action.
Oh yeah, the story of Naima, right?
Exactly. Yeah, the author uses her story as like a way to show these ideas in action in the real world. You know, like a case study of sorts.
Right, right. And it's fictional, but it really brings it all to life.
Yeah, exactly.
So can you remind us who Nima is and what she's trying to do? Like, what's her mission?
Okay, so Nima, she's this young woman full of energy and passion, and she's like totally committed to empowering other Tibetan women. She sees how much potential they have, you know, to be leaders, to be educators, to really make a difference in their communities. So she comes up with this program. She calls it the Lotus Program. And it's all about giving women this blend of traditional knowledge and modern skills, kind of like what the TWA does, but on a smaller scale.
Okay, I remember that. And there's that part in the article where she's going to the monastery and she's carrying this like beautiful heirloom chest with her. What's the deal with that chest? What does it symbolize?
Oh, yeah, that's a powerful image, right? It's not just some random prop. That chest, it represents the legacy of Tibetan women, you know, all those generations of strength and resilience and wisdom. And by bringing it to the monastery, which has always been this like male-dominated space, you know, all those monks and stuff, she's making a statement like, hey, women are here, and we're stepping into roles and spaces that were traditionally off limits to us.
It's interesting that she chooses to go to the monastery, you know, instead of just creating her program totally outside of the religious establishment.
That's a good point, yeah.
What do you think that tells us about her approach to change?
I think it shows that she's not about like rejecting tradition or religion altogether. It's more about working within those existing structures to make them more inclusive, more equitable. You know, like she recognizes that if she wants her program to really succeed, to have a lasting impact, she needs the support of the religious leaders.
That makes sense. Like, she's not trying to impose change from the outside. She's trying to build it from within.
Exactly.
And I remember the article mentioned that her grandmother was a big influence on her, right?
Oh, yeah. Her grandmother was a healer, very respected in the community. She was like a source of inspiration and traditional knowledge for Naima. taught her about the importance of connecting with nature, about compassion, or the power of this goddess Tara in Tibetan Buddhism.
Oh, yeah. Can you tell us a bit more about her? I'm not super familiar with that part of Tibetan Buddhism.
So Tara is a female bodhisattva, which basically means a being who's reached enlightenment, like the ultimate spiritual goal in Buddhism. But instead of just like chilling out in enlightenment bliss, Tara chooses to stick around and help other beings achieve liberation.
Wow, that's pretty selfless.
Right. And she's often depicted as this fierce and compassionate protector, a symbol of feminine power and wisdom.
So Naima is drawing on these ancient traditions, these powerful female figures to inspire her own work.
Exactly. It's like she's showing that Tibetan feminism isn't this like foreign import.
Yeah.
It's rooted in their own culture and spirituality.
That's such an important point. It challenges that whole narrative that feminism is somehow incompatible with traditional cultures or religions.
Same time. And Nyingma's story also highlights the importance of like intergenerational connections. How the wisdom and experiences of older women can guide and inspire the younger generations.
It's like that saying, we stand on the shoulders of giants.
Yeah, exactly. We build on the work of those who came before us.
So getting back to Nyingma's presentation at the monastery, what kind of reception does she get? Are people open to her ideas?
Well, it's clear that she's done her homework. She's thought this through carefully. She's not just barging in with some radical out there agenda. She's really considered how to present her ideas in a way that will resonate with the monastic community. And she's managed to get the support of some key figures, including the abbot himself, the head honcho of the monastery.
Wow, the abbot's on board. That's huge.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
What do you think convinced him to support her program?
Well, she's smart about it. She emphasizes how her vision aligns with the core principles of Buddhism. She talks about compassion, equality, the idea that all beings have the potential for enlightenment.
Yeah.
And she argues that by empowering women, the whole community benefits, everyone wins. It's not a zero-sum game.
So she's not framing it as men versus women, but as a collaborative effort to create a better society for everyone.
Exactly.
Very strategic.
That's awesome. And what about the other monks, the rest of the assembly? How do they react?
So the article describes this palpable shift in the room as she's speaking. People are leaning in. They're really listening. You can tell she's got their attention. She shares stories of other inspiring Tibetan women like 𝗧𝗔𝗧𝗔𝗡𝗞 Tenzin the nun we talked about earlier. And she highlights the successes of those women-led cooperatives, how they're improving the lives of entire villages. And by the end of her presentation, the whole assembly erupts in applause. They're genuinely excited about her ideas.
Wow, that must have been such an amazing moment for her, to see her vision so enthusiastically embraced.
Oh yeah, I bet it was incredibly validating. It really shows the power of authentic communication, of connecting with people on a deep level.
And the article mentioned that the abbot, he gives her this really meaningful endorsement using a Tibetan proverb, right?
He does, yeah. It's a beautiful one.
Oh, was it again?
He says, "A lotus blooms even in the snow."
Wow, that's poetic. What does it mean, in this context?
So the lotus flower, it's this super important symbol in Buddhism. It represents purity, enlightenment, the potential for transformation, rising above difficult circumstances. And the fact that it can bloom even in these harsh conditions, like in the snow, it speaks to the resilience of the human spirit, the ability to overcome obstacles.
So the abbot is basically saying that even though there are all these patriarchal structures, Tibetan women can still blossom and create positive change.
Exactly. He's acknowledging the challenges, but he's also expressing his faith in the transformative power of Nyingma's vision.
That's a powerful message of hope.
It is, yeah. Very inspiring.
So what happens next? Does her program actually get off the ground?
It does. With the abbot's support and the enthusiasm of the community, the Lotus program takes off. The article describes how women who were once hesitant to speak up are now confidently debating philosophy in the monastery, which is amazing to think about. Young girls are attending workshops where they're learning both traditional crafts and modern skills, like computer programming, which is super cool. And those women-led cooperatives are flourishing, giving women economic independence, which benefits their families and the whole community.
So Nyingma's vision is becoming a reality.
Yeah, it's really inspiring to see how one person's passion and strategic thinking can create this ripple effect,
Totally. It shows that grassroots activism can really make a difference.
For sure.
Oh, and what about that heirloom chest that she brought to the monastery? What happens to that?
The article ends with this beautiful image, the chest, which was empty when she first brought it, It's now overflowing with like scrolls and letters and tokens of gratitude from all the women whose lives have been touched by the Lotus program.
Oh, that's so sweet. It's like a physical representation of the impact she's had.
Yeah, and it really drives home the point that true progress isn't just about individual achievement, it's about collective well-being.
Love that. So we've seen how those Buddhist teachings, the emphasis on interdependence, compassion, challenging hierarchies, all that stuff, how it's woven together with Tibetan feminist goals.
Yeah, it's a really unique blend.
And we've explored how those ideas are being put into action through organizations like the TWA, through inspiring individuals like 𝗧𝗔𝗧𝗔𝗡𝗏 Palmo and Dolma Tsering.
And of course through Naima and her Lotus program.
Exactly. So what are some of the specific ways that these initiatives are actually empowering Tibetan women on a practical level? Like, what are the concrete outcomes?
So with things like the Lotus program, they're really focusing on like a multi-pronged approach to empowerment. It's not just one thing. One key area, as we've touched on, is economic empowerment. Giving women control over their own livelihoods. And as we talked about before, the TWA, they've been doing great work with those women-led cooperatives, providing training in traditional crafts, but also modern business skills.
Right. That blend of old and new.
Exactly. And it's not just about like making money, although that's super important, of course. It also creates this sense of community, of shared purpose,
Yeah, like a support system, a network of women working together.
Exactly. And then another huge focus is education. Like the Lotus program, they have all these different educational opportunities for women of all ages, which is awesome. For younger girls, they have these workshops that combine traditional arts and storytelling with modern subjects, like science and tech.
Whoa, that's such a cool mix.
Right. And then for older women, they have literacy programs, classes on healthcare, financial management, all kinds of stuff.
So it's like creating this space where women can keep learning and growing throughout their lives, no matter where they're starting from.
Exactly. And it's not just about like filling their heads with facts. It's about fostering critical thinking skills, encouraging women to become active participants in shaping their communities.
I love that.
Yeah, it's really empowering.
And the article also mentioned leadership training as part of the Lotus program. What does that look like?
So the leadership training, it's all about giving women the skills and the confidence to take on leadership roles, whether it's in their families, their communities, or even at the national level. They have workshops on public speaking, conflict resolution, decision-making, all that practical stuff. But they also incorporate those Buddhist teachings on mindfulness and compassion, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, that's unique.
It is. They emphasize that true leadership isn't about power over others. It's about empowering others.
That's a really different way of thinking about leadership. I like it.
It's very much in line with that whole Buddhist philosophy of interdependence and collective well-being.
Totally.
And it speaks to that unique blend of tradition and modernity that we keep seeing in Tibetan feminism. They're not throwing out their traditional values, they're reinterpreting them in a way that promotes equality and well-being for everyone.
It's like they're taking the best of both worlds.
Exactly.
This deep dive has been so eye-opening, seriously. I feel like I had like a very surface level understanding of Tibetan feminism before, but now I'm seeing the depth and complexity of it.
I'm glad to hear that. It's a topic that deserves more attention, for sure.
Absolutely. Before we wrap up, is there anything else you think our listeners should know about Tibetan feminism or about this whole movement?
I think it's important to remember that while we've been focusing on the positive developments, the inspiring stories, all that good stuff, the struggle for gender equality in Tibet, it's ongoing, There are still real challenges, especially when it comes to things like access to healthcare, education, and economic opportunities, particularly in rural areas.
Right, so it's not like everything's perfect now, there's still work to be done.
Exactly. It's a journey, not a destination. And it's a journey that requires constant commitment, collaboration, a willingness to keep pushing for change.
But what's so inspiring about Tibetan feminism is that it's rooted in this deep sense of hope, this belief that a more just and compassionate world is possible.
Absolutely. They're not giving up. They're in it for the long haul.
I love that. I think that's a powerful message for all of us, no matter where we are in the world, Change is possible, even when the obstacles seem huge.
For sure.
And by drawing on our own traditions, our own cultures, and spiritual practices, we can find unique and powerful ways to create positive change in our own communities. Yeah.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
This has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us.
It's been my pleasure, truly.
And for our listeners, if you're interested in learning more about Tibetan feminism, definitely check out TATANKA site. They have a ton of great resources, articles, interviews, all kinds of stuff.
It's a great place to start.
Yeah, for sure. And thank you all for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Tibetan feminism. We hope you've been as inspired as we have by these stories of resilience, compassion, and the unwavering pursuit of a more equitable world. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep pushing for a better future.